In the previous session, we focused on the workings of the competitive market and brought this understanding to bear by examining the theories of demand and supply, and of course, the concept of equilibrium. We learned that demand is determined by the price of the good, the prices of other goods, income, and also taste. We also learned that supply is determined by the price of the good, the prices of other goods, costs of production, supply, and technology. And lastly, we also came to understand that equilibrium occurs where demand and supply are equal. Now, the tutorials or the answers to the tutorial session are now available for you all to view. It is expected that these answers should further guide our understanding of the underpinning principles acquired during this session. For this week, we will begin to probe the key aspects of market equilibrium. And in this vein, we'll also examine the concept of price elasticity. If you may recall from last week that we mentioned that economists use diagrams or models to predict and analyze real-world events. Hence, we will draw on a number of models in making a number of analyses today. So, firstly, in determining price and output, it is important to understand how price responds to instances of surplus and shortage. In economics, we acknowledge that a shortage of products occurs when demand is more than supply. For instance, a limited supply of the latest model of Apple's iPhones will lead to an increase in demand. This is because more of the iPhones would be demanded by consumers, hence resulting to a shortage of iPhones. In this vein, the price of the iPhones would increase. On the other hand, surplus occurs when demand is less than supply. And in such situations, price falls as there are more iPhones in supply in comparison to the demand for those products. Additionally, and following from last session, we were briefly introduced into situations where demand and supply meet, or where demand and supply are equal. And in economics, this is referred to as the equilibrium point. The concept of equilibrium helps provide insight into the linkage between microeconomic and macroeconomic theory. It is generally defined as the situation where planned aggregate expenditure is equal to the output of the firms. And in plain terms, equilibrium is defined as the point where demand and supply meet, or where demand and supply are equal. Now, can you tell me which point is the equilibrium point here? Yes, you're right. And at the price of 60, demand and supply are equal at 350 and 350. And this means that at price 60, the total market demand is equal to the total market supply. And this is further depicted in the graph by the intersection at CC. However, it is important to note that shortage positions are positions found below the equilibrium price. For instance, by paying attention to the intersection of the demand and supply curve, it is obvious that at price 40, we would witness a shortage of 300,000 tons of potatoes. In a similar vein, price points above the equilibrium point are referred to as surplus points. Hence, at price 80, we would witness a surplus of 330,000 tons of potatoes. Nonetheless, the equilibrium point, as earlier stated, is at price 60. Here, the demand and supply are equal at 350. Hence, the equilibrium point is price 60, where the total market demand is equal to the total market supply. So let us proceed by examining more insights of price and output determination. And this would be illustrated by shifts in the demand curve. Previously, we mentioned that a rise in price will lead to a rightward shift. And if you remember that when the demand of a product rises, the price of that product will increase. That is, price will definitely rise. And Alternatively, a fall in demand will be illustrated by a leftward shift. This implies that when demand falls, the price of those products will fall because consumers are not very keen on that particular product. Now, in applying these considerations, let us apply a number of examples to test our understanding. So, first question, are you ready? Demonstrate the impact of a rise in household incomes on the market for the latest Apple iPhones. In answering this question, it is good to realize that when people's income rises, it pushes out the demand for the latest Apple iPhones. And this is illustrated by a shift of the demand curve to the right. Remember, when the demand of a product rises, the price of that product will increase. That is, price will definitely rise. Hence, as the quantity demanded increases, the price of the iPhones would definitely increase. That means the iPhones increases. So let us attempt a second example. Demonstrate the impact of a fall in the price of downloading music on the market for CDs, that's compact discs. What were your answers? Well, you're right again. A decline in the price of downloading music will lead to an increase in demand for downloaded music, and hence a decrease in demand for compact discs. Since no one is buying compact discs, the price of compact discs will reduce or decline from P1 to P2, as the quantity demanded declines from Q1 to Q2, hence a leftward shift of the demand curve. So let's move on to supply. And with regards to supply, we all remember that the supply curve shows the positive relationship between the price of a product and the firm's willingness to supply those products. Hence, a rise in supply will lead to a rightward shift, and in this vein, price falls. While on the other hand, a fall in supply is illustrated by a leftward shift, and this is indicated by a rise in price. So, in examining a decrease in supply, let us attempt a third example. Are you ready? Now, demonstrate the effects of an increase in land prices on the market for private housing. An increase in land prices means that private housing will become more expensive. And as a result, some firms might leave the industry, leading to a decrease in supply. Now, as firms leave the industry, the price of private housing rises, and the market settles with private housing being offered at higher prices. Thus, this would lead to a leftward shift of the supply curve. Now, that leaves us with the final example, with regards to an increase in supply. Now, demonstrate the impact of cheaper imported components on the market for UK-produced computers. Firstly, the market is originally at equilibrium at P1 and Q1. However, cheaper imported components on the market for UK computers would increase the supply of phones, and this causes or creates a glut or a surplus. And gluts or surpluses would force the prices to come down. Thus, the supply curve shifts to the right. The market returns to new equilibrium with more computers being available at a lower price. So overall, let us summarize what we've learned so far. For demand, a rise in demand will lead to a rise in price, and this is illustrated by a rightward shift. A fall in demand will lead to a reduction in price, and this is illustrated by a leftward shift. For supply, a rise in supply will lead to a fall in price, and this is illustrated by a rightward shift. And a fall in supply will lead to a rise in price, and this is illustrated by a leftward shift. Have you all got that? Brilliant. So let's move to a new concept called elasticity. And we've been introduced to the concept of the demand curve and also factors which cause the demand curve to shift. And some of these factors include price, the price of substitute goods, the price of complementary goods, consumer income, tastes, and expectation of future prices. However, it is also very important as business people and as economists to understand key pricing decisions, such as the impact of price changes or quantity demanded. With this in mind, the elasticity of demand is a measure of how buyers and sellers respond to changes in market conditions. So with regards to elasticity, we have what we also refer to as price elasticity, which is a measure of the responsiveness of demand to changes in price. Price elasticity measures the responsiveness of demand to a given change in price. I think this concept is an important piece of information to the firm, as it helps them predict how much the demand of their product will change if they alter the price. And in economics, we calculate price elasticity by saying the percentage change in demand over the percentage change in price. So let's put our business owner caps on and say, for instance, you would like to know how sensitive your consumers are to your prices. So if a small change in price leads to a bigger change in quantity demanded, we say demand is responsive to changes in price. However, if a large change in price leads to a small change in the quantity demanded, then we say demand is not very responsive to price. So let's try an example. If Apple reduces the price of its iPhone X from £1,000 to £950, would it have an effect on the quantity demanded? Not really. But what about if it reduced the price of its iPhone X from £1,000 to £500? What do you think will happen? Your guess is as good as mine. So let's look at some of the factors or determinants of elasticity. The first is the number of substitute goods. The second is luxury goods or items of necessity. And the last determinant is time. So let's start with substitute goods. The larger the number of close substitutes for a good, then it's easier for the household to shift to alternative good if the price increases. Generally, the larger the number of close substitutes, the more elastic the price is to demand. A typical example of substitute goods is butter and margarine. For instance, if the price of butter increases, consumers can easily switch to cheaper alternatives like margarine. Hence, we say demand is elastic. Other examples are carrots and cabbages, food as a whole. Now let's move to the second determinant, which is time. Time is important as it is likely to influence the introduction of new products. At first, when new products are introduced into the market, they may only have few substitutes. However, as they become successful, new entrants will come into the market and begin to compete. Hence, at the beginning, demand is likely to be inelastic. But in the long run, especially as more products enter the market, demand is likely to become more elastic. For most goods, demand may be relatively inelastic in the short run, and prices might rise, but it takes time for consumers to respond. However, in the long run, consumers are likely to shop around and switch to cheaper alternatives. Examples are the launch of new alcoholic drinks or soft drinks. Now, the last determinant are goods that are of necessity and luxury goods. Now, if necessity goods or luxury goods come to fall, then if the prices change, then its demand is unlikely to change if the prices change or if there's an increase in price. And this implies that necessity goods or luxury goods have inelastic are inelastic to demand. If the price increases, consumers will still buy them. Examples are cruise holidays, oil, food, designer items like Gucci and Burberry, to mention a few. So in summary, please feel free to explore the resources attached and explore the video links and external links that are attached to this topic. I think this will help provide a solid understanding of this session. Please read Chapter 2 of the recommended text by Beg and Ward and attempt self-assessment quiz 3. Also remember to attempt the weekly tutorials and the self-assessment quiz.